Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Margot Parmenter, and I'm the events coordinator here at the Hub City Bookshop. We're so excited to have you join us tonight for a conversation with author Emilya Naymark about her new book, Behind the Lie. This is the second book in her Sylvan Mystery series, which features NYPD detective turned private investigator Lainey Bird, a strong female protagonist who solves crime in a small town in upstate New York. Before I introduce our author and interview her about this exciting book, which I have my copy here with all my tabs ready to go, about her book, about her characters, her writing process, and a variety of other fun topics, I'd like to say a few words about our bookshop. The Hub City Bookshop is a full-service independent bookstore that serves the vibrant literary community of upstate South Carolina. We're part of a larger organization, which is the Hub City Writers Project. The Hub City Writers Project is a nonprofit whose mission is to cultivate readers and nurture writers. We do that by publishing original titles through our press arm, as well as by sponsoring a variety of literary programming in our community, including writers' workshops, book clubs, and author conversations like this one. If you'd like to find out more about any of our upcoming events, please head to our website at hubcity.org and sign up for our newsletter. Also, if you haven't yet purchased your copy of Emilya's book or your copy of the first book in the series, please click the button at the bottom of your screen, buy a signed copy, and buy from us here at Hub City. Buying the book through our shop is the best way to support the Writers Project and your local bookstore. I'm going to introduce Emilya in just a second, but before I do, just one more important thing to mention. Please feel free to ask questions. Some time will be reserved to answer them, and we may even work them into the author interview. So if you have a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen and submit the question that way. You can also just feel free to drop it in the chat box on the side of your screen if you'd like. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our author. Emilya Naymark is the author of novels Hide in Place and Behind the Lie. Her short stories appear in A Stranger Comes to Town, Secrets in the Water, and After Midnight, Tales from the Graveyard Shift, among other publications. When not writing, Emilya works as a visual artist and reads massive quantities of psychological thrillers, suspense, and crime fiction. She lives in the Hudson Valley with her family. Hi, Emilya.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm
Thanks
very
for
excited.
being here. We're
Yeah.
so excited to talk about your book. So since this is a series, and this is the second book in the series, I thought for those in the audience who maybe haven't read the first book or just haven't had a chance to read their copy of the new book, if you would maybe read a portion from the book to kind of get us going, get us started with where we are and the world that we're in.
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm going to read the prologue or the first chapter of Behind the Lie. And hopefully it will be interesting. Okay. Oliver Dubois rammed the pickup truck through his front door on a sweaty midnight in July at the tail end of a massive block party. It wasn't his truck, and the street was closed to traffic, so the vehicle's emergence out of darkness and slow rumble up Oak Drive scattered neighbors and guests alike into confused groups on candlelit lawns. With a grind of gears, Oliver veered a sharp left and jumped the curb onto the Dubois front walk. The guests, addled by 12 hours' worth of food and alcohol, gawped as the truck butted the front steps as if it were a drunk pausing to gather its thoughts. Oliver idled for a minute, and the instant the neighbor dropped his solo cup of sangria and took a step forward, he revved the engine, vaulted the 4 steps, hesitated, and then gunned the truck's snout into the front door, splintering it. "Whoa, whoa," the neighbor shouted, and then everyone ran toward the noise, the children weaving in and out between the adults, feet bare on the asphalt and grass. Oliver didn't listen. The vehicle buckled again under his foot and crashed through the doorway, disappearing inside the astonishingly large new opening. Locked inside the sedan across the road, Holly Dubois clawed at the fastened door handle, horrified by the sight of her husband destroying their home. The driver gripped her wrist and held tight. "Let me out," Holly said in a voice so low and hoarse it hurt. The driver clutched her wrist tighter. They would have been away by now, blocks, if not miles away, if it hadn't been for the police barricade someone had set across the side road to keep the party enclosed. The barricade should not have been there. Only the main road was supposed to be blocked. Their car had crept, headlights off, up a dark street parallel to the party, and made the turn that would then take them to the highway, only to face the blue barriers, and, shortly after, the marauding truck. The driver let go of Holly's wrist and reversed the car. Holly scrambled for the door again, struggled to unbuckle her belt, her shoulder a howl of red pain. You know what happens if you leave, the driver said. Holly clenched her jaw and pressed her fingers against her eyelids, though did this nothing to erase the image of her husband behind the wheel of the truck. A group ran past them, their voices trailing in the dark, reaching Holly through a crack in the window. Holy shit, is that Oliver? And don't move him. And call 911. And in the background already, a siren, then another, and another. Then, has anyone seen Holly? Followed by, who has the kids? Finally, the police cars and an ambulance, the EMTs spilling out, the crowd parting. In the sedan, silence. Some 8 hours earlier, the height of the party had seen over 400 people milling up and down Oak Drive, drinking beer and cocktails, ladling sangria from giant tubs with ice islands. An entire tent had been devoted to food, another to games. The children squealed as they jumped inside bounce houses and on trampolines, and the adults yammered about the weather, sports, and local school intrigues. Oak Drive was the friendliest block in Sylvan, a small municipality in upstate New York, with the winding routes, forests, and horse farms, reminiscent of quaint 18th century paintings, and the split levels, colonials, and white-collar politics of suburbia. The Dubois family, or more specifically, Holly, was the social center of the town. Her clan had lived in Sylvan for 3 generations, in the very house, now sporting a truck-sized hole in its facade. As the car backed up, with care, its headlights still off, a child wandered away from the noise and lights, his shoulder-length hair backlit. Kiki, Holly shouted, loud enough for her son to snap his head in the car's direction, but it was too late. The car was rolling backward around a corner, doing a K-turn. She rattled the door and lowered the window, aiming to climb out, but the window stopped at a 5-inch gap, and she felt her chest contract, as if an iron hoop crushed her ribs. This is how people have heart attacks and die, she thought. And under that, I don't want to die. Let me out, she said, once she could breathe again. Fuck you, said her companion. The breeze changed then, and an acrid odor swept up the streets, making Holly's eyes water, settling grit in her throat. My God, someone yelled as they drove past the manicured lawn. Fire! The driver tapped the brakes, letting the car slow, made a sudden left, and took them back toward the block party and the smoke. At the bottom of the hill, hidden from view by a hedge of spruces, bright yellow and red flames snapped into the night air, blackening the siding of 46 Oak Drive. Dimmed windows. Empty driveway. Empty driveway. With a jolt, Holly realized the blue pickup truck, now blanketed with siding and drywall inside her living room, belonged here, to the couple who'd moved in 6 months ago, to the body still sprawled, as far as she knew, in a pool of blood in the den. A soft sound escaped her associate, a hitched breath, then more sirens, noise, and shouting, and they were reversing again, a squeal of tires, and off, away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that reading. I love that because it starts us off on like such an interesting question, which is the setting of Sylvan. So when this book opens, we're at this block party in this small hamlet, and almost the entire town is there, and then this crazy thing happens and everything goes awry. And it kind of gave me these vibes of, oh, this is a very perfect, idyllic place, but underneath it all, there's, obviously a lot of secrets, a lot of things happening. And so I kind of wondered if you could speak to this particular setting, how you imagined this town, and sort of how you made it come to life.
Sure, that's a great question. So, don't we all have deep and dark secrets just underneath everything? So, the town is actually based on the town where I live, and it is kind of this weird combination of suburbia and kind of a rural setting with a horse farm, kind of walking distance from where I live. But we're very close to New York City, so there's a lot of there's a it's kind of a weirdly metropolitan / rural area. And as far as the block parties goes, my neighborhood before the pandemic, we used to throw these kind of humongous, gigantic parties where basically, all the cops were there, all the firemen were there, all the neighbors were there, everybody's families were there. There was like 600 people on one block. And during one of those parties a few years ago, I just thought, man, this is like a perfect setting for crime. Like you just wouldn't. How would you even begin trying to solve it? I mean, there's half the town is the suspect. Like if something happens. So that's kind of what started that. That scene kind of came to me.
Oh, that's so interesting. And so could you give us a little bit of background on maybe the first book, since this is the second book, and kind of tell us how we came to be in Sylvan? Because in the first book, Lainey sort of has a past. She's fleeing that past. She's in the NYPD in the first book. And now in this book, she's sort of a little more settled in to this hamlet of Sylvan. She has a new life. So can you give us, just a Reader's Digest version of kind of where we are when this opening scene happens in the life of the character?
Yeah, sure. So what interests me in writing a series is not necessarily constantly sort of presenting my character with a new crime to solve, but watching her particular arc and journey. So my main character is Lainey Bird, who was an NYPD undercover detective who worked a Russian mob racketeering case before the first book even begins. So when that case goes very bad for her, and then her private life explodes and her husband leaves her, and all of a sudden she finds herself a single parent working an extremely demanding job, a career, and the mother of a teenage boy who's actually a handful. He's a handful. He's not an easy kid, and she makes this decision to sort of break ties with everything, leave New York City, leave her job as a detective, and just go to like the safest, quietest, most peaceful place she could think of. She goes to upstate New York, to this little town. But, as we all know, crime is everywhere. And when I was doing my research, I actually found out that 3 of the deadliest cities in all of the United States are in upstate New York. So
That's
there's
so interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, which I actually did not know when I decided to make my move here. But I did find out after I started doing the research. And there's certain kinds of crime that you're more likely to face living, generally in this area than you would in New York City, which is pretty amazing to me. And is a big revelation to poor Lainey as well. So in the first book, her son, who's a teenager, he's 13, he disappears. And so it kind of, she's at the time that this happened, she's not settled. She hasn't processed any of the things that led to, her case going bad. She hasn't processed her divorce. She hasn't processed anything. She's sort of in this limbo state. And it's just basically her and her son, and they're alone. And then he vanishes, and she has no idea if he ran away, which is a possibility. Is it the mob after him, which is also a possibility? Is the ex took him, like all of it? She has to figure it out. So that's book one. In the second book, she's beginning, her growth. She's beginning to get more settled. She's beginning to sort of form connections. She has a job as a private investigator, which is actually a very common path I found also by doing research. And so it becomes, so she's, she all of a sudden she's at this party. She's one of the hosts, and it kind of falls to her in a way to begin to figure out the hell happened. So
very interesting. Yes, thank you. Gives a good summary, and it also gives me a good way to jump into discussing some of sort of the themes of the book. And one of the big themes of the book is women and the pressures that women face in society. And so obviously Lainey, as your main character, being a single mom, being divorced, having this teenage son, and also, working and trying to support herself and support her son, has a lot of those themes drawn into her character. But then one of the other major characters in the book is somebody who we do meet in that prologue that you read, Holly. And she is she has a whole other set of problems that women face in society. So can you tell us a little bit about Holly and kind of how you imagined her character and how she acts maybe as a foil to Lainey?
Yeah, so Holly was this character, and she's in the first book too, and she kind of becomes this way in for Lainey to enter the society of this town, because she's just incredibly gracious and kind, and she just opens her house and her heart to everybody, and she doesn't judge, and it's like she has this prime directive in her mind to be, beautiful, kind, a good cook, the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect housekeeper, the perfect everything. And in the first book, you kind of meet her, and she becomes this sort of paragon of womanly virtue that Lainey looks at and thinks, man, why can't I be like that? That's that's amazing. She's this great person. So they become very good friends, because it's kind of hard not to be friends with Holly. She just makes it easy to be friends with her. And I would like to think that we all know a person a little bit like that. However, there's no way you can actually be like that without paying a price. So Holly she's chasing this mirage of perfection, and it begins to completely destroy her from the inside out, and then eventually from the outside in, because she just wants to be everything to everyone. She wants to support her whole family. She wants to help her whole family, and to a certain degree she can maintain it until the requests on her resources become completely unmanageable, but she's still trying to manage it. And so she gets herself, she begins to get herself into trouble, and then into like even more trouble. And then there's crime, I write crime. So crime happens,
I think that's such an interesting entree into the crime, that you have this, this character who is, vulnerable because of exactly how hard she's trying to be good. And that's like a very interesting and perhaps not, the typical way we think about how crime happens, at least as comfortable readers sitting at home, in our middle class living room reading a book. But it mirrors the kind of the setting and the sort of this idea of something lying beneath or lying behind, this idea that it's really her attempt to chase perfection or to chase the mirage of perfection that actually makes her vulnerable to sort of being exploited by these other two sort of criminal characters in the book. And just to what you were just saying, I thought there's a passage a little bit, just a few pages after the prologue, when we're sort of getting our feet wet in the story, where you describe Holly and you say, 6 months earlier, she went to a therapist because she suspected her need to help. She's helping everybody while cannibalizing her own well-being was pathological. And I just thought that's such a incisive way of putting it. She's helping everybody and she's kind of coming undone. So can you tell us about those other characters that she sort of meets along the way? And maybe it's hard without doing any spoilers for the people in the audience, but just a little bit about what happens to Holly.
Yeah. So what begins to happen to Holly is because of something that happens to her in her childhood. She starts to feel this need to not let anybody in her family get hurt or fail in any way at all whatsoever. And she has two brothers, and the brothers begin to kind of fail in their lives. And so they need money. They need a lot of money. And so she thinks, well, I can economize this way. I can economize that way. And the economy works a little bit, but eventually, like, the needs of everybody she's trying to support begin to overwhelm her. And so she begins to do things that aren't moral or legal, although they're completely moral within her own moral code inside of herself. And so she begins to she wakes up one day and realizes that she's so far down in the hole money-wise and nobody knows about it. She somehow managed to keep it a complete secret from her husband, from everybody. She's just somehow managed to do it, but she's so far in the hole that she just can't even, there's no climbing out of it without committing more crimes. And she has a connection to something that makes her, in addition to her sort of emotional weakness, she has an actual connection to a situation that makes her very vulnerable to, like you said, to being exploited. And so these two characters come in and use her to get to the thing that they need, that she can get for them. But in order to do that, she has to obviously break a bunch of laws. And she has to start doing that. And so I wrote about the Russian mob in the first novel. And I can't get away from writing about bad Russians. So I put them into the second book as well, because they're a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun to write about.
I don't think American readers can get away from reading about bad Russians either. I think the American readers are so interested in that, and you see it a lot all over TV and movies and books. So can you speak to I don't know to how sort of the Russian themes or the Russian characters operate in this novel, and what's happening here, because it's not the mob, is it?
I tried to be a little less explicit with what they are. I guess the best way I can put it is that it's a form of espionage that they are after. And the reason why I like writing about Russians behaving badly is because I am from Russia, and my family immigrated when I was a child, and it just never fails to amaze me how how easily Russian culture lends itself to this kind of crime writing. And I kind of been doing a lot of sort of thinking and research on it, and I think a lot of it does have to do with basically three generations growing up under communism, where and communism in a way kind of encouraged a very DIY culture with paradoxically a real sort of disrespect of authority, in the sense that you would say what you were supposed to say, pretend to do what you were supposed to do, and then do what you needed to do anyway. And this was like across the board, everybody did it. It was just part of the culture. So in a way, it does kind of like breed this sort of attitude that take care of yourself first, do what you got to do.
Sure, what you have to do. It's so interesting, though. I mean, what do you think about? I'm certain that many of the representations that American readers or encounter in popular culture are stereotypes, right? So how do you feel about just the idea that American readers are kind of flattening that understanding and are just so used to seeing a Russian character as a villain and not having maybe this deeper understanding of the culture and of where this springs from. That was such an interesting insight to hear you describe it just now. So what do you think about kind of the
Well, I get, obviously, as anybody who reads about their culture written by somebody who's not of that culture, I am, fairly sort of sensitive to where it can go wrong. But I'm actually impressed. There's been quite a few, authors and producers who do not go wrong, who actually do understand it. And then, I guess it's with like anything else, if you do your research, you're going to be okay. And if you just use other books and TV shows as your research, you're probably not going to be okay. But I've been like rewatching The Americans, and I think that's a pretty brilliant. They rarely go wrong. They almost never do. So that's a good one. If anybody wants to do that.
In the chat for the readers.
Yeah, there you go.
On FX, I think it was. Yeah, that's a very interesting, very subtly done show.
Yeah.
So I wonder if this is going off the theme that we're talking about just now, but it's going back to one of the themes we were talking about before, which is women in society and the pressures that they face. And one of the pressures that Lainey, the protagonist, is facing is this relationship with her teenage son. Can you tell us a little bit about Alfie and about what their relationship is and why it's a difficult one?
Well, Alfie is an odd kid. He's not. The world is not an easy place for him. He's been trying his whole life to really sort of understand and find his place in it, and just kind of figure out how everything works. And he has his own sort of obsessions and interests. And he also has his own moral code. And the things that would sort of scare or turn off, you would think, the majority of kids don't scare or turn him off because they might be interesting to him. And so from book to book, he kind of ends up getting himself into bad situations, but not because he's a bad kid, but because he just doesn't really understand the dangers. And he can't really read people either. He doesn't really understand why people do what they do. He works on a very sort of top level, sort of skin level of understanding. So that's him. And then there's Lainey, who is she's not a girly girl. She's not like a, she's been a tomboy. She all she ever wanted to be was a cop. Her dad was a cop. She became a cop because of her dad. She's just this very straightforward, kind of person. And so her son is like a complete mystery to her. But then, like I said, she sees Holly and she thinks, here's Holly. She's got 3 kids. She's got this. She's like always has home cooked dinners. Her kids are always perfectly turned out. Why can't I do that? So that's her unrealistic goal, because we all have these unrealistic goals. Women have to be, you know, you have to be really good at your job, and you have to make sure that the kids are taken to all of the extracurriculars, and when they come home there has to be a meal somehow, and you have to be just this like amazing person. Everybody needs to be this amazing person. And if you're overweight, it's because like why didn't you try this diet? Or if you're not feeling good, if you're a little sick, well, why aren't you drinking cider vinegar? It's always like your fault for not being fantastic. And so I have three female characters in this book, and each one of them has this unrealistic goal that's kind of like that they're butting their heads against, that ultimately destroys 2 of them.
Yeah. It's so, one of the things that I was thinking about when I was reading this book was, and actually I want to read what you said to me because it was so incisive when we were emailing about what we were going to talk about ahead of time. You said the pressures women face in our society when it comes to supporting their families while maintaining a career or even a sense of self. And I just thought, oh my goodness, like, really, it's really hard. There are so many pressures from every side, and it becomes difficult to really even just be who you are, let alone do all of the things. And women are really swimming through so much cultural junk that is just like, really put on us, that is not really put on men. All this, like, this may be a different set of expectations, but it's not, it's certainly not this perfectionist ideology that women have to contend with. So I think one of the things that I marked off in the book here was in chapter 22, just at the beginning, it's Lainey. And you just write, as much as Lainey wanted to put all her resources into finding Holly, her friend who goes missing, not to mention ferreting out everything she could about the mystery female in her son's life, she had a job she both needed and enjoyed. And I thought, okay, well, there she is, trying to maintain her sense of self and her career while being pulled by all these other responsibilities that she has. Can you speak to that a little bit, of how do you as an author kind of make your character realistic, but also kind of help her to have a sense of self and an identity as a character that readers can relate to?
Well, I mean, I think people do relate to her. I've even read sort of male reviews that relate to her, and I think these characters kind of came to me from people I know, and my own experiences to a degree, but I definitely know way more women who stepped away from having careers or full-time jobs and became, even if you don't become a stay-at-home mom, even if you just step away from the path, the climbing path, it's still just so much pressure. And it's obviously it's worse when the kids are small, when they're a little more grown, it's like begins to relax a little bit. But I've watched, I remember going to whatever little league games with my son and watching moms have this like Kubrick stare, the Kubrick stare, like because they work a full-time job in the city, commute, they have 3 children, each one of them has something going on. And even with an au pair, which some of them had, it was like it was like you just watched them and you just kind of imagine them like holding on to like something with their hands, just like trying not to be, exploded from the inside somehow.
So true. And I wonder, did you write this during the pandemic or was it pre-pandemic? Because the pandemic has brought has brought this to the forefront of cultural conversation, I think. This idea that women, it has made the caretaking and all the work they do so much more visible. So I was just wondering as I was reading, like, oh, I wonder if like any of this drafting happened during pandemic.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I didn't write. I had about half of it written. I had a lot of it written before the pandemic, and then I finished it during the pandemic. Um, and it was crazy, and of course, it all went into it because I watched. As I sit in my office, and I've been working from home before the pandemic, but I sit in my office and I would watch moms grab their kids, put them in their, minivans and drive them to the Starbucks because all of a sudden, the Wi-Fi for the neighborhood goes down and there's still homework and one of them has a test, and meanwhile, like the mom has a job, so she's still trying to, but she can't because now they're all in Starbucks and the younger kids are like, who knows doing what. The slightly older one is taking a test while the mom is trying to have a meeting. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm tired already. It's not
I'm
even
tired just hearing about it.
It's not even me. but yeah, there's like I definitely did not see dads doing that as much. Although it does happen, of course.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's in, let's see. I think there's this passage as you were speaking in the very beginning of the book that introduces Holly that I think captures just this notion of exactly how much work there is involved that I wanted to read. She says her husband, he had his hands full with work, the research he conducted at Calypso Technologies consuming him 60, 70 hours per week. The bills, their social life, the children were her responsibility. She ran a tight household. She knew how to economize, and a few thousand here or there out of the family savings couldn't hurt anyone. Hell, she even repurposed old sheets, curtains, and her mother's tablecloths into Halloween costumes for the kids. By cooking every meal herself, she avoided the expense of fast food and dining out. And her paranormal romance novels, she also sells novels in addition to all this stuff, were selling moderately better. So it's just, there's so many plates that she's juggling. And I think we do expect women to juggle all the plates. We kind of, and it's not to say that working a full-time job isn't a big responsibility and very taxing, because it is. Working 60 or 70 hours a week is a lot. But there does seem to be a sort of a cultural ideal in which we kind of cushion men, and we kind of we try to protect their ability to work these high intensity jobs as much as we can. But I thought another thing that was very interesting was Holly and Oliver, her husband's relationship, and how it sort of develops over, they're both keeping secrets from each other. They're both facing pressures, and her desire to be perfect and to chase, as you were saying, this unachievable ideal really gets in the way of her connecting with her husband. Can you talk about their relationship a bit?
So I feel like almost everything I write at the end is really about love. It's about some kind of love, whether it's, love for your children or the child's love for a parent or a love between siblings or spouses. And it's always that because, and maybe it's just very interesting and very fascinating to me. It's much more interesting for me to write about all the ways that love can kind of disrupt and corrupt you from the inside while being this goal and this thing that makes you do whatever you do at your own expense. That's just so much more interesting to me than writing about desires for power or money. because when love takes you, you can't, there's nothing you could do about it, against, you can't fight it. It's just, you just have to make up your mind about how you're gonna live with it, whatever the other person chooses to. That's why there's so many kind of really weird, even toxic or unhealthy relationships. It's not because people are necessarily, you could say, oh yeah, they're afraid to walk away from it, but it's not that simple. If you love somebody, it's just, you're gonna try to be okay with whatever they throw your way, for
That's
better or worse.
That's so fascinating, and I've really never heard it put that particular way, but obviously love is one of like the great themes of literature. But that is just such a wonderful, really articulate way that you just put it, of, really, it's this really central, fundamental, motivating force of life. And people are really just like modulating how they handle it. They're not, our ability to kind of control, I think it would be like, it would be like very like the Greeks or the Aristoteles to say, like, it's a madness. It's in some ways a madness that we are, and how beautiful and interesting that something I think we'd all agree sort of universally good can be corrupting, can lead people down all of these, against their own moral code, against the laws of the society, etc. So in talking about love, there's a portion at the very end of the book, because Lainey is she's getting on her feet again. She's been through this divorce, but there's a sort of a romantic interest character. And by the end of the book, she's kind of working through what she's going to do about this romantic interest. And she's talking about her divorce, and she says, I loved him like crazy loved him. Like, I think there was more crazy than love, actually. And turns out he never loved me back. I just kind of wished our marriage into being, but it was a fantasy. Can you talk about where the inspiration for that came from, or just like that depiction of love? Because I thought it was very, I don't know, just very captivating. I was really captivated by that passage.
So it's in the first book, I go into why Lainey needs that. And when she's, she had a brother who committed suicide when she was a teenager. And very shortly after that, both her parents died. And so by the time she's 18, she's completely alone in the world. And she was one of those people who, she's not like a deep thinker. She doesn't examine her soul. She was, really very happy within her family. And so all of a sudden, to be so alone, it's like everything inside of her just started looking like, how can I recreate this as soon as possible? And then she meets this beautiful, beautiful man, who is nothing like her at all. He's an artist, and she, so he's just, but he's beautiful, and they get along, and he likes her, and they fall in love, and she just kind of like wishes this life with him into being. And she becomes a cop, she gets pregnant, they get married, and all of a sudden, within 4 years of having lost this family and having lost everybody she loves, she now has it again. And not only that, but she moves to the house where she grew up. And basically her brother's room becomes his studio where he paints. And then they decide, okay, well, he stays home and takes care of the kid, which I guess kind of is the opposite of what we've just been discussing for the past half hour. But it doesn't work, obviously. That's not a secret that he begins to feel very put upon. He doesn't have that sort of altruistic, I will give up being an artist for the sake of my child. He can't do that. And so that's why that comes apart. But for her, it was just, she just needed that family again. She needed that love. And, plus she was so young, it's hard. That's when you have those kind of completely insane and crazy love affairs. So
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, yeah, maybe it may be the case that most of us have had at least one like that. So something everyone can relate to. So I want to shift gears a little bit because I want to make sure we get a chance to talk about this. One of the topics that comes up in the book is youth homes. And you said in our conversation when we were preparing for this that you did a lot of research on youth homes, and some of the events that happen fictionally in this book were based on real things. That can you talk about the research and kind of what you found out about youth homes and what these headlines were that some of this was inspired by?
yeah, so again, I was like shocked. I mean, you don't have to make anything up if you're an author. All you have to do is read some newspaper accounts. It was crazy. So there is one across the Hudson River from where I live, and it might be closed by now, but oh my God, I did not invent a single thing about what happens there. So over the course of less than a year, something like 14 children, young, like 14 or 15-year-old children, basically walked away, like ran away from there and disappeared into like they just were gone. Like there was no way to find them. And when I started doing research on it for what happens, turns out nothing happens because it's actually not like if they're in the youth home to begin with, it's because they either come from a bad family where there's nobody to take care of them, or they maybe committed a crime and they're there because the judge put them there. But if there's not enough people in the system to oversee or take care of them disappearing is just it's not like cops are going to be looking for them. It's not like Law and Order or CSI. They're just gone. They just go away. But in like I think I described, there was one scene where a girl makes a flamethrower from like a hairspray bottle and burns another girl. That really happened. There was an incident where several kids beat up one of the orderlies so badly that he ended up in the hospital with brain damage and a coma. I mean, uh, awful things. And so, and I did research about not just what happened there, but what is the recourse for that. And I think like the thing that shocked me the most was that, like I said, there's just no recourse. There's nobody to turn to bring them back, to improve their lives, to fix it in any way.
Yeah, that's oh wow, that's just so profoundly sad, and something I think I'm happy that um, that we got a chance to talk about it, and then it comes up as being inspired by reality, in the sense of raising awareness that this kind of exists, and that these kids just end up sort of lost because nobody, you
They're
know.
yeah, they're lost, and then they become so vulnerable to being again exploited because it's just been very easy for someone to just pick them up and drive them away and use them whatever way they need to use them. Yeah. So
Well, that's yeah, that's so to on the topic of kind of behind the scenes sad, upsetting crime, things that maybe the lucky amongst us who are reading about it in an armchair don't experience on a daily basis. Are there more crimes, more things that Lainey's going to solve? Are there more books coming soon where we can follow Lainey?
wow. I would like to think yes. So
Okay,
I hope so.
that's
Yeah.
encouraging. We hope so too. So we have about 10 minutes left, and during the last 10 minutes, because we are a writers project and we try to support writers and come around writers and also inspire readers, but we have a lot of our audience who are readers that are aspiring writers. So I was hoping we could talk a little bit about your writing process, how you came to be a writer, and your path to becoming a published writer as well.
So Unlike very many people, I wasn't writing from like the age of 2. I only sort of began to be very serious about it maybe 12 or 13 years ago. And I started taking classes because I was like from zero. I didn't even study writing or literature in college. I studied art. And once I started taking online classes, um, I just loved it. I loved writing, and loved the challenge of putting together a good sentence. And I very quickly started getting published for short stories, but then I was like, well, I want to write a novel. So um, I wrote I wrote 2 novels that I queried that didn't go anywhere. And in between that, probably 3 other novels that I never finished. They weren't even good enough to be queried. And then Hide in Place, I finished, I queried, I got an agent, and I sold both books in a 2 book deal during the pandemic. so,
Wow.
so that to me was pretty amazing.
Ama- that's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. So it was one of those situations where, when I got my contract, I had to send it back, a paper contract. I had to go to the post office, and it was like putting on a hazmat suit. It was like gloves. It was when we still were told to wear gloves and masks and everything. And I just kind of went there, and the poor, postal employee was behind like 2 sheets of plastic, and I had to sort of basically hand it over with, I don't know, not even with my hands. I mean, it was just, so and then,
Full on. That's
so,
a full on pandemic publication story with
yeah,
all the trimmings.
yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very grateful. It's published with Crooked Lane Books. So I'm really grateful that they took that chance, and they've been really, really good to work with. So,
Can you tell us a little bit about just like on the daily basis, your writing process and what it looks like and kind of like how, you know, how you get words on the page? Because I think like the biggest point of advice that I see from aspiring writers is just like, just finish a draft. Finish a draft of your novel. As long as it's working, try and finish a draft, because if you never finish it, you'll never be able to query and you'll never go anywhere. So focus on that. So I don't know. Do you have any particular words of advice about the getting those words on the page every day?
yeah, it's totally true. You can't continually rewrite the first chapter. You have to sit down and you have to write. And um, just I give myself 1,000 words a day to write in the first draft, only in the first draft. And I try to kind of sit down. If it's not every night, I shoot for every night. If it's not every night, whatever. Forgive yourself. Keep going. But if you do, even if you do like 300 words a day in 3 months, you've got a first draft. Just do it. And then when you're done, then you can sit back and you can outline it. Well, I outline it. Not everybody, works with outlines, but for me, an outline is necessary before I can move on to the next draft. And once you're done with the first one, I mean, that is that's the biggest hurdle. Once that's done, everything else is cake. Yeah.
Um, I guess I just have one additional question on like the writing and the writing process. How did you choose this genre? Was it just always very close to your heart, the genre of crime and suspense, or is it something you love to read, or what about it is this genre particularly appeals to you?
Um, so I tried my hands at other genres. I tried paranormal romance, which was fun to write, but didn't go anywhere. And I tried speculative fiction, which was also kind of fun, but I realized that when you write speculative fiction, by the time you're done with your first draft, it becomes real fiction, and then you got a whole bunch of technology wrong. So, and then I realized, well, hell, I'm married to a cop. Yeah, I might as well use his knowledge. So I was just like, you know what? I'm just being silly for not, even taking advantage of that. So I was like, great, I'm going to write crime. I've got a fact checker at my elbow. So
Wonderful. Does he read the books? Does he give you feedback on the plausibility of certain plot points?
I sat down with him. I sit down with him with like bullet points. I'm like, can this happen? And then he has to tell me. I'm like, what about under these circumstances? Can it happen under these circumstances? And then he'll tell me. And then he walks me through some very specific sort of police procedural elements, which, because, like, for example, I have a scene where I need the cops to run into a house. Well, guess what? Cops can't run into a house. There has to be a reason. There has to be the cops have to like witness something happening in order for them to go into a house. They're like vampires. They have to be, it's either a warrant or they have to be invited. So I don't think like you'd know that if you weren't a cop or had one sitting next to you,
That's true. I remember that line from the book. That was a great
Yeah.
line too, about them being like vampires, or you
Yeah.
have to invite them in. It's a
Yeah.
good way of putting it for a lay audience. That's very smart and interesting. Okay, one final question. Who are some of your favorite people to read? Or who are you reading right now?
So I love Tana French, and the moment I know she has a book coming out, I pre-order it. I am a big fan of Chris Bojalian. Lisa Jewell, she's great. I mean, Neil Gaiman, Anne Rice, J.K. Rowling. I have, obviously Stephen King. Right now, I'm picking up a book called, it just came out. It's called Vladimir. And I forgot the name of the author.
Is it Julia May Jones?
Yes, it's Julia May Jones, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. Oh, and another one who's like I just love how she writes is Jean Hanff Korelitz, who just came out with the book called The Plot this past year, and I loved it.
I loved that one too. It's a great book, and she has written so many books. I didn't really know. I read The Plot, and then I read the one that she should have known, or you should have known.
You should have known. Yeah, that was a good one. That was good.
It's a good one. Yeah. So she's she's a great, I think, like she's written so many books and kind of had breakout later in the career. So it's something as like writers and aspiring writers that I always find very heartening, when it's sort of like, okay, like, at any, getting your work out into the world is what's important, and the readers will hopefully recognize it. But at any point it could be the breakout. So, I love those stories.
I was listening to an interview by another author I like, and she said, and she just wrote like her fifth novel, and her fifth novel is like the breakout novel. And she's like, yeah, overnight success after writing 5 novels. So, but that seems like a more natural progression for an artist. You get better. So
Absolutely. I know. And it's just the story that it's one of these narratives of the overnight thing. And very rarely does it happen that way. There's been all this work behind the scenes that the writers do that we try not to show, I guess, because we want to make it look as seamless as possible for the reader. But Emilya, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This was a wonderful conversation, and we're so happy you could join us. And everybody, please click the button and buy your signed copy of Emilya's book, or if you haven't started the series yet, buy the copy of this first book, Hide in Place. And I also want to let everybody know that the recording of this interview will live here at this link, and it will also be posted to Hub City's YouTube page. So if you have friends who wanted to be here but weren't able to make it, or you just wanted to share the video and the interview because you liked it, you can definitely find that on Hub City's YouTube and share it on all your social media pages. So Emilya, thank you again. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Good night. Great. Good night. Thank you.